program. The program, Insuring for Major Disaster, is being presented by Charlotte Allen, CIRMS of Social Insurance Agency, Terry Guest, CIRMS of Berg Insurance Agency, and Christina Keel, CIRMS of Russo Insurance Agency. I keep using that word CIRMS. That is a national designation for insurance. So it's a very prestigious designation to earn through education and experience. So thank you to all of our speakers today, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen and get the PowerPoint going. All right. Make sure I have the right one. Here we go. So that's us. In case you didn't know, we're going to talk about insuring for a major disaster. We are CIRMS. Thank you for pointing that out. We are proud CIRMS designees, so Community Insurance Risk Management Specialists. And we wrote down kind of a number of things that we have to do to maintain that status. But really what I want to say is when you see a CIRMS designation, you know that that person has really devoted their insurance career to CIDs. We are specialists. We help community associations. That is all we do, and we're very proud of it. So to us, that's what that designation means, but there are a number of hoops that we must jump through in order to do it, similar to the PCAM. So today we're going to talk about before, during, and after a disaster. And since there's three of us, we kind of broke it up in that way. So although we're not ghosts, we are going to visit Christmas past by talking about, you know, before the disaster and the insurance that you really need to be prepared during a disaster, because things do happen and you want to make sure that you're prepared for whatever that might be. And then the after portion and how you can recover from a disaster or a claim and move forward from there. So without further ado, I'm going to have our first panelist walk you through the before.
Morning, everybody. I'm Terry Guest from Berg Insurance Agency. And while this presentation is called Insuring for a Major Disaster, having the right insurance in place is important for more reasons than just preparing for wildfires and things. If the insurance for your community is insufficient, even a small claim could end up being a major disaster. So, what kinds of insurance do community associations need? Some are required by law, some by the governing documents for your community, some are dictated by the preference or the risk tolerance of the board and the manager. Types of policies that are required by the Davis-Sterling Act include general liability, directors and officers liability, and fidelity. Fidelity is also called crime sometimes, or employee dishonesty sometimes. All the same, it protects your money. Specifics on property insurance requirements for your community can hopefully be found in the governing documents. Those documents might also specify if the board shall or may purchase earthquake or flood insurance for your community. So if your governing documents have non-standard requirements, for example, your buildings look like condominiums, but the CC&Rs state that the owners are responsible for insuring the structures, it happens. I've seen it so many times. You cannot over communicate this little nugget of information enough, because if your community is hit with a disaster and people thought they were insured and they're actually not, you could have a much bigger disaster on your hands. Next slide, Charlotte. Okay, the intricacies of the insurance policies. So having the right policies in place before your disaster is obviously super important, but you should take a closer look at those policies to be sure that the coverage in place includes the necessary items needed if, heaven forbid, the entire community is lost and it needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. First, make sure the total insured value is accurate. Ask your agent for a copy of the building valuation and be sure that the date that it was created is recent. Does your coverage include foundations? Is your coverage replacement cost, extended replacement cost, or guaranteed replacement cost? Those are three very different valuations. Keeping in mind that major disasters often affect wide areas, look at how many homes were affected during the wildfires. You can imagine supply and demand went a little crazy during the rebuilding, so the costs for the building material skyrockets. Extended replacement cost and guaranteed replacement cost coverage can protect the association in the case of increased construction costs. Unfortunately, I have been seeing those communities that are in or near wildfire areas that have guaranteed replacement costs right now. Some of them are losing it. They're not offering that anymore. So make sure you have at least extended replacement cost, which means you'll get up to 150%, let's say, of what your total insured value is. Okay, building ordinance. Let's talk about building ordinance. If your building was originally constructed in the 70s, you can imagine the building codes have changed just a hair since then. So some new building codes even require demolishing the undamaged part of the building so the entire structure can be brought up to code, which is sad for people that their part of the building is just fine when there's a wildfire, but they have to destroy it anyway. Building ordinance coverage is specifically for these types of rebuilding costs. So it's a sub-limit. It's not included usually in your main limit. It's a sub-limit. So look at the amount listed on your policy and consider if it's enough. For example, if you have to add fire sprinklers, that runs around $15,000 per unit. So if you have 100 units, you need at least $150,000. I think I did that math right, just to add fire sprinklers when you're rebuilding, not to mention all the other building codes that you need to meet. So back to your governing documents for a hot second. Is your association required to insure the interiors of the units or just up to the bare walls? Make sure your policy matches what the documents require. But if your documents are unclear, or some of them allow the board to decide the coverage that they want, be certain that the correct information is communicated to the membership. Again, prevent a bigger disaster by making sure that your coverage gaps are prevented. Other bells and whistles that policies can have include coverage for backups of sewer and drains. Some carriers exclude that. Some carriers add it back in to check and see what your carrier has. Some carriers cover wind damage or removal of trees that are blown down by the wind. They might fix the fence that the tree fell on, but removing that tree that actually fell, sometimes that's not covered, which is weird, and it comes as a surprise. Next, yay, thank you, Charlotte. So Scout's motto is be prepared. I know all of you Scouts are doing your Scout handshake hand thing. So this holds true for community associations as well. So before anything bad happens, set up an emergency action plan and share it with your membership. Folks should not only know where the emergency shutoff valves and the fire extinguishers are, but also how to use them. You can create maps that show where the locations are and include basic instructions. I used to be a manager back in my early days, and we had one community that had this color-coded map that showed where all of the water shutoffs were, where all the gas shutoffs were, where the wrenches were, and they taught people how to use them. And there was one of those binders located in every building. Have your local fire department assist with developing an evacuation plan, especially if your community is a high-rise, if you have a senior community, or your community has unusual features that might make evacuating complicated. Back when I was a manager, again, we had a senior community and they had annual fire drills with the local fire station. I'm not entirely sure if they set that up for safety or so that the ladies could see the firemen. I don't know, either way, it was successful and we did it every year. And I wasn't mad, of course. As Michelle said earlier today, maintaining defensible space around your community, totally critical. I've seen some communities, last night on the news, I saw a community in Napa County, and I've also seen one in Santa Cruz County, where the community association was working with the county and local agencies to make sure that the defensible space around their community was maintained. And even beyond their community, making sure that it was maintained. So in conclusion, I was at a CAI luncheon once and the presenter said, proactive is less expensive than reactive. This is especially true when preparing for a disaster. Making sure your insurance coverage is correct, accurate, and comprehensive is invaluable. Making sure your community members are prepared can literally save lives.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. And, you know, as you're talking about the evacuation plans and community readiness, I thought of Mark Glassberg, who's a current board member for CAI, CNC. He's the CAVL in his HOA, and I had the privilege of reading through not all, but a good deal of his 115-page disaster planning handbook. I'm sure it's grown since then, but he's working with CAI National to spread awareness and work with local municipalities, surrounding communities. If your community is struggling with, how to gain information from local, city, county, how to organize it, how to introduce it, any of the above, I know he would be absolutely thrilled to go through that information with you and provide any assistance he can. So just came into my mind. I thought, he's a great asset and resource for that. So side note, but good afternoon. I'm Tina Keel. I'm from Russo Insurance Agency. And as you could probably guess, these 3 sections that we're going over could be an hour each section. So there's a lot of information. I'm going to do my best to stick to my 20 minutes as succinctly as possible, but just know that there is much, much more where that came from. So I'm at the disaster part of the presentation. And basically, this is when the worst has occurred. You could have lost one building, or you could have a community-wide loss. And either are devastating to any and all involved. If you want to go to that next slide, Charlotte. This scene is truly breathtaking, and this actually was from the Camp Fire 2018 in Paradise. I'm going to reference this fire a lot since we're talking about disasters, and this one was really close to home. So Terry spoke about evacuation plans and safety prior to the loss, so I'm going to focus on more of what happens when a devastating loss does occur. During a large loss of just one building or the community, there won't be that age-old discussion that we have on a regular basis about who is responsible for that loss, or if the master policy deductible is going to come into play. You're just going to see action on the ground. And the beauty of the information age is that most carriers already know the affected areas. They have these amazing maps, digital maps, and they're looking at those maps with relation to the fire devastation zone. I was speaking with one of the adjusters that was, boots on the ground at the Paradise campfire, and they said that their insurance carrier already knew which areas in the community had been affected, and specifically which insureds had actually been affected by those losses. So the carrier automatically opened up claims for those particular insureds to get the ball rolling, get an adjuster assigned, and start working on that claim and getting those owners some funds so that they can make secondary plans. And I think that's pretty incredible. In the old days, it was very reactive, and these days, we're notified that a loss is occurring by that carrier. So that's pretty incredible. And so most carriers, substantial carriers, you can change the slide, Charlotte, sorry. Most substantial carriers will have a catastrophe bus, and it's a mobile command center essentially. So this is where typically a fleet of mobile vehicles will deploy to that disaster strike area. They serve as high-tech customer and community support centers. The buses are equipped with self-contained generators and satellite communications, and they provide for free all of the things that you see listed on that PowerPoint slide. The mobile command center is staffed with those particular carriers' claim representatives who specialize in CAT losses or catastrophe losses. And most of these adjusters that are at these sites, they're used to going around the country, going to large losses and helping folks out during those claims. So this isn't their first rodeo. They know exactly what they're doing, and they are trained and ready for this type of response. So if you go to one of these mobile claim centers and you're a single family home owner, standalone homeowner, or even if you're a condo unit owner and you have an HO6 policy or your condo contents policy, your claim can often be handled right there on the spot, and you can receive funds for your immediate needs like food, clothing, and temporary housing. And, a lot of times folks come to these command centers and they have no idea whether their home has actually sustained a fire loss or not. They evacuated to safety. They're far away from their home, and they're coming to these command centers to find out essentially, is my home still standing or not? And those command centers typically will be able to tell them their home did sustain a loss or not. They'll have an idea. Usually if your home didn't sustain a fire in a fire loss area, you're going to have smoke and soot damage and any other number of things. So I know during the Napa fires, when I went down after, they allowed us in the area, there would be a home that was standing completely untouched, and then the home right next to it was completely gone. And so it really is true that you don't know if your house is going to be there when you return. So those mobile command centers are just absolutely incredible, and a benefit to those folks when they're experiencing that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how the agent fits into the claims process, because we usually reference the adjuster and the carrier, but we're over here, and your relationship is with us. And the answer to where we fit in is really everywhere. If the claim has already been filed by the carrier, that carrier is going to notify the agent of record. And from there, we have a claims coordinator that's going to keep tabs on your claim. Any agency that you work with should have a specific claims coordinator. They're going to keep tabs on your adjuster, find out who your adjuster is, get their contact information, get you folks in touch with each other. We're going to look at the claim status as it goes along, and we're going to keep notes on every communication that comes across our desk so that we can reference it and look back and see where we are. It's important to note that we as your agent, we don't work for the insurance carrier. We work for you. You are our customer. So if you're having any issues with your adjuster or the claim, you're having any troubles whatsoever, your agent is the one who's going to advocate for you. So call your agent. They can make those phone calls. They can get things where they need to be. If an adjuster needs to be changed, or maybe an adjuster has moved, we can figure that stuff out for you. And we should, because that's our job as your insurance agent. So there's a lot of coordinating going on, though, during this time period. We're keeping tabs on the claim, the adjuster's working with you. And in a homeowners association, we also have a board of directors and management. And there's a management role during that as well. Obviously, the board gives their directive to management companies. So perhaps the management company or the manager is the one taking the lead on coordinating your claim and all those moving parts. I recommend, even outside of a large disaster, that you know what the agreement in your management agreement says about claims coordinating and additional costs. Some management agreements include that in their overall cost. Some include it as an added or billable expense. And as you can imagine, large scale losses, it's not just hours of additional coordination. This is years of additional coordination sometimes. So you want to reference that with your management company ahead of time. Short or small scale or large scale, it's really wonderful to know what you're looking at ahead of time. And then really, it's beneficial to have a point person or a claims liaison. So if that's not going to be your manager, maybe it's somebody on the board, or maybe it's someone within the community that has a great deal of insurance experience. They don't even have to have insurance experience, but they would be a point person for the claim to coordinate all of those things. We had a loss up in the Tahoe area, and about a $300,000 loss, 2-story water loss affecting 6 units. And we had the unit owners and their spouses or partners communicating with the adjuster. We've got the board, which is comprised of 5 or 6 people communicating with the adjuster. Everything was just going haywire. So they established a claims liaison, a single point person that all the owners would send their information to. They would then forward that to the board and the adjuster. And it really saved so much time. Before that, the adjuster would answer a question to unit owner A, and then all the other unit owners wouldn't know and find out later. And it's just a lot of moving parts. So regardless of who that contact person is, hopefully you have that claim liaison in any situation. But their key responsibility is to have that constant communication between the adjuster, the affected owners, the board, manager, and all of those vendors as well. To give some guidance to the board, the CC&Rs will reference the board's ability to negotiate, compromise, and settle a claim as part of your board-related duties. So please review the insurance section of your CC&Rs. They're typically no more than 4 pages long, and that'll give you some clarity on the procedures that you need to take during a claim and the board's ability and responsibilities as well. Perfect, thank you, Charlotte. It's important to note that community-wide losses like we saw in Paradise are largely unprecedented. So we're, as a group, we're used to dealing with, the day-to-day losses. These large losses, we don't have a roadmap for them, but the insurance agents and the adjusters do have that roadmap, and that's where we really come in. So for losses like we saw in Paradise, boards have to make a decision, a hard decision alongside their community, whether they want to rebuild their community or whether they want to walk away from that community. So if the CC&Rs are boilerplate, they're going to pretty much say the same thing. You have to go through a process. There's a process to that. And for one association we had in Paradise, unfortunately, they did sustain a complete and total community-wide loss. And so they decided that they wanted to dissolve the entity, but they needed 100% votership in order to dissolve that entity. And they already knew it was going to be an uphill battle because some of the owners were not available to make a vote. So the next thing that they had available to them was the vote to not rebuild. And they needed 3/4 of the community votership, the residing members, and in some cases, your CC&Rs will say the first lenders as well, any loans within that community. That's hard to get all of those entities to vote on that. But this community was able to get a 66% vote to not rebuild. And so what ended up happening is a single entity investor came in, bought up all the parcels, dissolved the entity, and they're in the process of rebuilding a new development that may be apartments, HOA, but that was their particular process. And I have to say, experiencing that type of loss, that large scale loss, being able to work with and I say our because it's our chapter HOA attorneys that were on those projects, and they know HOA, they understand CC&Rs, they get the interpretation of the CC&Rs and the rules and the civil code. And it was absolutely paramount having, those knowledgeable attorneys on those projects, and they really guided the board through that process to get them back to where they needed to be. So whether your community chooses to rebuild or they choose to keep forging forward, the insurance adjuster is going to create a scope or an estimate. We can go on to that next slide there, Charlotte. So we call it Xactimate. Verisk creates this Xactimate scope, and it's just an estimate of what your property is valued at. So we're going to create this scope. And the thing that I found really incredible when I was first learning about claims is how do you create an estimate off of something that doesn't exist there anymore? So the adjusters just said, well, we do it a lot of different ways. So they'll actually go out to the property, they'll measure the footprint of each building, because oftentimes the foundation is still there. They'll go to county, city records, pull blueprints, and it's the information age, right? So they'll go on to Zillow and Realtor.com and Google Earth, and there's pictures everywhere. I put pictures on my slide because at my home, I've taken a video of my entire house and my belongings and all that is encompassed within that. So that if something happens, I can give that video to the adjuster and they can virtually walk through my home and see what they need to count or include in their replacement costs. When you go through even a small scale loss, it's maddening. And, you know, you don't want to have to do a mental, you know, inventory on what your contents were or what countertops you had. You just don't care about that. You're just trying to survive what you're going through. So pictures are worth 1,000 words, and they also help that adjuster create that scope. The adjuster will also go through a different interview process with the board, management, and various community owners, and they'll do a questionnaire as well. And that scope isn't, you know, they give it to you and that's it. You can tweak it. The board can come back and say, you know, the shape of this building isn't accurate. We need to add this additional information on there. So it's a group process. So we'll go to that next slide. So the adjuster is then going to apply the scope to your coverage. So they'll come up with a value, and they're going to look at your coverage and apply that for payment. As Terry discussed, the limits of coverage and all the bells and whistles will be included in this payment or not, depending on what coverage you've chosen. So for those policies with the broad form of coverage and those ancillary items that are included, you're going to get the broadest payout available. And this is crucial to communities, particularly that choose to rebuild in these areas, because they need every penny that they can get. As most of you know, the lumber costs have just shot through the roof if you can get it, and finding contractors to come into that area. In 2018, we had fires going northern and southern California. Contractors were coming in from all over the place. So the prices were higher, and they were unusually higher. And the Napa fire, our replacement cost per square foot was $300, $400 a square foot. I had someone tell me it shot up to $700, $800 a square foot in some cases to rebuild. So you need every penny that you can get. So one of the most crucial and detrimental items in your coverage, aside from your building, is your loss of assessment coverage and extra expense coverage. The business of HOA, your business, needs to keep moving forward, and you're going to have these weird extra expenses that you would have never had you not had this loss. So we recommend that you take a real close look at that loss of assessment coverage, your business income coverage, and make sure it should be at least or greater to 1 year of your annual assessment income. So at least 1 year or more of your annual assessment income to pay for your lack of dues, because, you know, some owners just may not be able to pay their dues. They're just trying to survive again. So you need that income to come in. You're still paying your management, you're paying attorney's fees, and so it's crucial. Aside from that, again, that scope isn't the end all be all. And as I stated earlier, you know, lumber prices have increased. There's going to be supplemental invoices that come in from unexpected areas, and you want to submit those supplemental invoices to your claims adjuster so that they can then add that to the list or tally of your total amount of loss and make those supplemental payouts. In fact, I recommend sending any and all of your invoices and estimates from your vendors over to your adjuster. They'll keep tabs on those tallies, those totals. And of course, as long as you haven't exhausted your coverage limit, they're going to make those supplemental payments. And just so you know that there's a protection for you as an insured, there's a 2-year statute of limitations for you to be able to provide additional or supplemental invoices to your adjuster to get paid out on that policy, of course, up to the policy limit if it hasn't been exceeded as needed. So from there, it's just a matter of time, literally, depending on your community devastation level. If you need to await approval from the city or the county. I know for Paradise, they were talking about the fact that there was no sewage infrastructure present in that city. Each home was on septic. So they had long conversations about infrastructure, rebuilding this, or building, not rebuilding, but building this infrastructure. And then you have entities coming from outside sources that are bidding on area-wide cleanup, debris removal, environmental cleanups from hazards caused by these fires. So you're waiting for a lot of things to happen before you can even break ground. So it is a time-consuming effort for you to go through that process. But many of the homes now have been rebuilt in Paradise. Construction is absolutely still happening. We're seeing the aftermath of that right now. And a lot of the homes that are having trouble moving forward, it's oftentimes, lack of material, availability of contractor or an insurance dispute. And of those three things, the insurance dispute, that's really the one area you do have control over, because if you're working with a knowledgeable insurance agent that specializes in homeowners association, they have your best interest in mind. We're going to be working with you to insure all those assets properly and make sure that you don't run into those troubles should the worst occur. So in the event of a loss, that is really where we shine, because you see how that coverage, proves to be what your payout is. So that's where we shine. There's a beauty in the aftermath, and it's where you see the community come together and you see the community rebuilding. And I know Charlotte shared with us some success stories of some of the communities that came out from the Napa fires, and some really nice stories to move us forward kind of into that future. So I'll turn the mic over to our third panelist, Charlotte.
Thank you so much. I'm Charlotte Allen with Social Insurance. I get to say good afternoon. I just checked, it's official. So I know Terry and Tina got to say good morning. I'm saying good afternoon. One thing that really stood out to me that Terry mentioned is, I know we're talking about major disasters today, but any small claim or disaster can turn into a major disaster, and you really want to be prepared and plan for that major disaster. All claims are an issue, they're all a headache, but we want to be prepared for the absolute worst. But I want to talk about the aftermath, so we know, how to prepare. We want to insure properly. Thank you, Terry, for running us through that. So important. You want to work with an advocate for your community, a specialist in the CID industry. And then once that disaster or that small claim hits, before it turns into a major disaster, you want to make sure that you're, immediately doing the things that Tina talked to us about. Now let's talk about the after part. First, I want to talk about some of the myths. And this is very true, especially of, not those major disasters, but those smaller claims. A lot of boards push back and say, oh, no, we don't want to turn in this claim because we heard if we turn in a claim, there may be higher premium. Or if there's any paid losses, we might be non-renewed next year. I'm too scared to turn this in. And so really, the truth is not all claims even result in payout. So, and insurance companies are typically it's a numbers game, and they really want to look at what did we collect versus what did we pay out. So turning in a claim does not necessarily mean payout. And what I encourage boards to do, and I encourage community managers to encourage their boards to do, is take that liability off your shoulders. Go ahead and turn in the claim and let the insurance carriers fight it out. Figure out, based on the CC&Rs, based on the coverage, based on all of the elements of that loss, really who is responsible. It shouldn't be the board's decision on who they think is responsible. And that questionable, well, it might exceed the deductible, but I'm not sure. Again, I say turn it over to the insurance company and let them decide. Takes the pressure off of the board, takes the liability off of the board, and leave it to your insurance experts to follow through and to the very end and see what happens. And truly, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but turning in a loss does not always equal the higher premium. There's also ways to avoid these petty losses from happening over and over again. Or if you notice that we've had like 5 small losses that just barely exceed our deductible, you can play around with the association's deductible. On average, and I get asked this a lot, what do you see on average for an association's deductible? I typically, for a condominium or townhouse where there's shared walls, I see an industry average of $5,000. Now, if you've got an association that has suffered, 5 very similar water losses, while you're fixing whatever the issue might be, maybe you add a water deductible where you didn't have one before. Or maybe you move your deductible from 5,000 to 10,000 until you've figured out exactly what the issue is and how to avoid those small claims. So there are things that you can do. And if you increase your deductible, sometimes that may result in lower premiums. So people can rejoice over that. I also suggest, and I know many attorneys in our industry suggest adopting a deductible policy. So one of my, standbys is, of course, you want to be completely prepared. You want to have insurance policies in place that you're comfortable with the limits that you know will be sufficient. But you also want to avoid any kind of conflict, right? No one wants parties to be fighting over who pays what to do. And so if you do adopt a policy, a deductible policy, then there's no question when a loss occurs, whether it be a small claim or a major disaster, how the deductible is going to play out. Is it going to be based off of certain factors of the loss? Is it, something that you've taken out of the CC&Rs? Is it equal among all parties? That's something that you can talk to your attorney about, and you can write a policy that works for your community. And then educating the community and making sure that everyone understands that this is going to be the process. Because as we're all educating you here in the Zoom room as to what to expect during or before, during, and after a loss, it's important that you then take this information back to the communities, and that the homeowners at large understand what they can expect as well. What is the disaster plan for all of them, all the parties involved? And really, we want to make sure that, yes, losses occur, claims will come up. That's why we have insurance, but we want to make sure that we're able to bounce back. What I tell communities is this too shall pass. One thing, we can find ways to avoid the same loss in some cases. Obviously, wildfire, we want to make sure that we're cutting our trees back, that we're getting things inspected, that we're doing our part. Some losses are unavoidable, but in a lot of cases, like some of the most common fire losses occur with the dryer vents in dryers, right? Not being cleaned out. It would be as simple as just cleaning out the dryer vents regularly, and that can prevent so many fires from occurring. So sharing the information as a community to your insurance expert, how are you as a community avoiding this loss from happening again, is going to be vital. One, not only is sharing is caring, sharing the information with your community and coming together to avoid those losses will build camaraderie. It will help people feel confident in the board, in the manager, but also sharing that with your insurance agent, because we want to take this information back to the carriers when we're, shopping insurance every year. And we want to let them know, yeah, I know you see on their loss history that they had a fire, but let me explain. It was a dryer vent not cleaned out. And guess what? That community now has regular newsletters that go out to the entire membership that tell them you need to clean out your dryer vents. I've even come across an association that had, I think it was 2 losses that were pretty back to back, same thing, that dryer vent situation. And they went as far as actually paying someone. So the board voted to pay a third-party company to come out and clean the dryer vents for the association. And so we were able to take that contract and show it to the insurance carriers when we were shopping for competitive bids, and proving to them that, hey, that loss or those losses, they're completely avoiding it by being proactive. If you've had water issues and you did a complete pipe replacement, if there were roof issues and you've replaced the roof, all of these things are preventative and should be shared with your agent, because we need to make sure that we're painting that picture, that we're getting that information over to the insurance carriers. We all want to move forward. We don't want to see your insurance premiums increase. We want to make sure that you're getting appropriate coverage, and we need to make sure that we're telling that story to our insurance companies. And then education can go a long way. One thing, and this can happen up front too, you want to really avoid those gaps in insurance. Tina talked about I love that she went through her home and took a video of her interior. So there's no question, you know, when a loss occurs, oh, this is what she had in place. But also making sure that she knows, that unit owners know what they need to insure for on the interior of the unit, because you really want to make sure that you're closing those gaps. We know what the association insurance is responsible for, and then we need to know what the homeowners are responsible for, and then we need to get that out to the membership so that they clearly understand. I'm a big fan of town hall meetings. I was when we were able to be in person. I would even suggest that, hey, if you think you have a hard time getting membership out, I would be happy to sponsor cupcakes to get people in the clubhouse at 6 p.m. With the joy of Zoom at our fingertips, we're actually able to get our membership out more than ever. And when I say out, I mean in, you know, a Zoom meeting room. But it seems that people really want the information and are making themselves available to get it. So let's utilize that. Let's take advantage of that and get the information out. And then again, in that same meeting, talking about avoiding those gaps. What is the association responsible for? What do you need to be responsible for? What type of insurance policy do you need as a homeowner? You can also talk about evacuation plans and make sure that you're getting to everyone to, again, just be prepared together as a community. You also, it is the board's due diligence to review insurance annually. I believe it should be really reviewed annually and with a fine tooth comb. And what I mean by that is invite your insurance agent out. Hear what they have to say, ask questions. You know, I love that Terry talked about the bells and whistles. And I always say, like, well, they're not really bells and whistles. This is important coverage that you absolutely need. And so talking about, well, what sewer drain limit, backup limit do we have? Oh, we are a 1970s building, and I think we are going to need fire sprinklers when we rebuild, and we don't currently have them. What's our building ordinance limits? These are fair questions. And if you ask your agent these questions and they don't know the answer, that's a problem. So please go to someone that specializes in HOA insurance and then invite them to your meetings. We love to hear ourselves talk. We love talking insurance. We lovingly call ourselves insurance nerds. We would love nothing more than to be invited to your meeting and go through insurance coverage, line item by line item, so that everyone feels comfortable. And then, of course, it is important that you review those CC&Rs. I know they're not easy to understand, and certainly for, you know, especially new board members, they're like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to take in. But again, going through the insurance section at the very least with your insurance professional, talking to your association attorney, and making sure that you feel that your CC&Rs are relevant to the plan and are crystal clear when it comes to the insurance section. And if they're not crystal clear, being proactive, looking to change those, or looking for proactive insurance policies, despite the fact that that CC&R section is vague or silent. Okay, and then I am going to talk about this, and I think it's really important, and Terry mentioned it too, I believe it was Terry, earthquake insurance. Be really careful, because some CC&Rs, not many, but I have seen them, certainly in my day, some CC&Rs actually say you must carry earthquake coverage. And Terry's shaking her head because I guarantee that we've inherited something where we've asked to quote something, and the first thing we do as insurance agents, Tina's shaking her head too, we look at the CC&Rs. Okay, great, you want me to quote insurance for you? Give me those CC&Rs. And the first thing we do is we look in the insurance section, and if we see that earthquake needs to be purchased and they don't currently have it, how many times has that happened? It has. And so it's really, really important that you review those in CC&R. Oh, she's counting. Oh my God, see, that's a problem. So we need to make sure that we're really looking at those CC&Rs and talking to an agent that also believes in looking at those CC&Rs and knows what CC&Rs are. Yes, we've heard that in our day too. So do associations have to purchase earthquake coverage? As I said, if it's in your CC&Rs and it says you must, yeah, you need earthquake coverage. However, many CC&Rs don't mention earthquake at all. But here's the deal. We live in California. Most of us on this call, right? We live in California. We know, okay, everyone's been telling us this for years, that the big one is coming, right? To the Bay Area, the big one's coming. And we live in earthquake country. So is it important that we discuss earthquake insurance? Absolutely. And that is my big takeaway. You know, if we're talking about major disasters, we would be remiss not to talk about earthquake. It is here. It is, we are in the territory. I think it is really, really vital that associations have the discussion. You know, and the discussion can be, do we want to bid earthquake coverage, and have a discussion as to what it could cost us? What are our options? Inviting the insurance agent to talk about those options. There are multiple options when it comes to earthquake insurance. And the most important takeaway is having that conversation. Start it today. Call your agent if you haven't already, and just get the ball rolling on the discussion. Okay, so now I'm going to get emotional. This is very near and dear to my heart. We've talked a lot about the fires, and I think that it is incredibly relevant to where we are today. You know, we saw the devastating losses on the news, in the pictures, and some of us lived through it ourselves. My own family lives, I have lots of family that live in Napa, but particularly this little girl here, her name is Lenore. My sister went into early labor with Lenore in October of 2017. My sister lives in Napa and was going to give birth in a Napa hospital. She went into early labor, so already a huge shock. And the moment they checked into the hospital, they got calls from their neighbors that their neighborhood was being evacuated. And then hours later, the hospital got labor and delivery units prepared for evacuation because the fire was surrounding the hospital as well. So I will tell you, the good news is their home was left standing. Major smoke in the neighborhood, but it did not burn down. The hospital stayed standing, and they were able to give birth to little Lenore, we call her Lenny, while fires were surrounding them. It was a crazy time. But again, this too shall pass, and life does go on. I will tell you, you know, and Tina mentioned it, that after a major disaster, especially when it's affected, you know, so many neighborhoods, the price to rebuild skyrockets. And even though their house was left standing, a couple months later, a pipe exploded in their bathroom wall and it flooded their bathroom. And immediately they were like, oh my gosh, you know, this, we have a newborn baby, we have one bathroom, we need to get this taken care of. And it was so hard to find a contractor that could do that because they were busy with all of Napa, and the price that they ended up paying for it was astronomical. But they needed a restroom, so crazy. So I want to talk about a success story, if you will, because I think that when we talk about these major disasters and when we talk about these fires that happen for so many of us in our very backyard, to ourselves, to our loved ones, it's a very emotional thing. But there are, you know, these wonderful stories that you hear that, you know, these, as we rise from the ashes. And so we have this particular HOA. They were over 100 single family homes. They had common area amenities up the yin yang, beautiful association, pool spa, lots of trees, paved surfaces, you name it. And prior to what was it, 2016, they actually found that they were underinsured. They really felt they were looking at the reserve study and looking at the amenities that they had, and the board was very intuitive and said, this doesn't seem right. So they went to go shop insurance, and we were able to work with them, and we made sure that they felt confident that they were insured to value for all of those things. And I can tell you, after the fire wiped out a large portion of their common area, every single tree was replaced, and they had enough coverage to do it. So this brings us full circle to the before a disaster happens. This association did all of those things that Terry walked us through, made sure that they were insured properly so that when a major disaster hit, and we never really know when it will hit, they were prepared and they were able to recover. Oops, I stopped sharing. Sorry, guys. But that leads us to our question and answer time. I think that, we're doing okay on time, right, Rachel? Are you proud of us? Rachel, do you have any Q&A in the chat that you wanted to share with us, or do you want to take questions from the audience?
I have no Q&A in the chat as of right now, but if you have a question, you are more than welcome to come online, or if you have a situation where you want to say, yes, this happened, or here's how we handled it. Anybody?
Please.
This is Darren Bevan, longtime listener, first time caller. I just want to say to the panel, great job. That was outstanding. I don't have any particular questions. I just wanted to compliment you because not enough compliments are provided these days. So wonderful to have you, and a lot of great information for boards and managers and everyone else involved in this process.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks for calling in today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This is so convenient.
Anybody else? Oh, we have a question in the chat. Take it.
Earthquake insurance.
On the earthquake insurance front, do you have some general leanings, insights beyond the important discussion note?
I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead. I thought you
The
did.
majority of the time, the board of directors says earthquake insurance is too expensive, we can't afford it. So that's where the conversation ends. It's really important to, and I'm not going to lie, earthquake insurance is important. I think it's not as expensive as flood, I've been finding out lately, but it is expensive. But remember that you're splitting it amongst everyone, and there are different ways that you can handle that expense. There's opt-in programs, there's unlike regular property insurance where you need to insure 100% to value for your community, you don't have to do that with earthquake insurance. So you can get a lower limit for earthquake that makes it more affordable for you, and then you have at least some sort of coverage. So the important part is the conversation, but you might be pleasantly surprised. Ask.
I think the most important thing is just get a couple of bids, different deductible options, different limits, and have the conversation, see what it would cost per unit owner. Then you can have it in your minutes that you actually did have the discussion. You can vote on it. You can get community thoughts on it. And if you have never considered earthquake and something happens, then that's a totally different story. So
I also have two questions that were a private message to me, and then I know Jen Jacobson has a question, but the first question I got is, what about replacement cost coverage if they choose not to rebuild?
So if a community experiences a complete and total loss and they choose not to rebuild, they're not going to be privy to that extended replacement cost that Terry was talking about. So if the community says, you know what, we're going to walk away from the property, we've got a votership to not rebuild, or they get the votership to dissolve the entity, the insurance company will still make payout, but they're not going to get that full payout as if they were going to rebuild. So you're not going to get all of those extended replacement cost coverages, et cetera. So that's a great question.
And I will just add that extended replacement cost endorsement, although it's great, it really is intended for those times when, okay, the cost to rebuild has increased because of a major disaster. And actually, if you read the endorsement, you still need to be insured to value.
Correct.
And I love that. I know these ladies have seen it in their career as well. And again, it's usually, agents that don't specialize in HOA, but they will put that extended replacement cost endorsement on an underinsured, undervalued association and sell it as, don't worry, you have more coverage. You don't. And that scares us so much.
Yeah. That's a very dangerous thing. So, and then you get into the co-insurance conversation, which is a totally different ball of wax, and those penalties. And so always make sure that you're insured up to as close as possible to 100% value.
And the next two questions are the same. can you please talk about facilities reopening, specifically pools?
Oh, you mean due to COVID?
Yes, I believe the question said facility reopening after COVID.
We're getting just inundated, you guys. By the
Okay.
way, you all look
Just Jen.
fabulous today. This is Jen. You all look
Jen.
amazing. I'm just so pretty and so smart. All together. But anyways, we are getting just slammed with questions, and all the managers on here can tell you too. We don't have insurance coverage because of the SARS epidemic. What's your take, if any, on us reopening our pools and our gyms and all the stuff now that we're starting to get into the tiers where we can do that?
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Okay. Well, we all have a response. I actually have been getting these emails from HOA Resources, and they talk a lot about what to do with reopening your facilities. As we're entering into this arena where we can start reopening, or we're starting to look a little like normal life outside, a lot of homeowners associations are having this conversation. And I know we've had this back and forth, like, talk to your attorney, talk to your agent, talk to your attorney, talk to your agent. Because it really comes down to an unprecedented situation where, we don't know, it's the first time we've ever been through this. So those HOA resources have been really paramount. The best thing that a community can do if they do choose to reopen their amenities is to make sure that they're following as many guidelines for safe and health and safety as they possibly can, cleaning spaces, social distancing, maybe a pool monitor, limiting people within the pool, having time periods where they exit the pool for additional cleaning, anything and everything that you can do to prevent yourself from getting into a pickle by showing negligence, by being negligent in some way. And I'm happy to pass those articles on. In fact, I sent them to a few customers. I don't know if you two have anything additional to add to that, but.
I totally agree. I take a very conservative approach with this. I agree that if a board decides with their attorney to open an amenity at this time, that they are looking at CDC guidelines at their specific county and following those suggested protocols. Because just a reminder, and Jen mentioned it, but if you didn't catch it, there are major exclusions for COVID, basically, communicable diseases. Pandemic is a word that we're seeing in these policies under these exclusions right now. So it scares me a lot if there's going to be, a loss claimed regarding the pandemic. There's not going to be any coverage. If you're upsetting the membership because you're taking a more conservative approach and only letting in a limited number of people or completely closing a facility, I'd much rather you deal with that type of lawsuit than one regarding COVID, because we know it's completely excluded. That's again, I'm very, very conservative when it comes to that.
Yeah.
I think we keep getting asked, should we open or should we not open? And all of us are like, we're not going to tell you one way or another. We're not going to say, yes, you should open, or no, you shouldn't. So
yeah, and
we're sorry. We're going to tell you there's no coverage. That's all we're going to say.
This article actually references every community is different, and each board must make the decision to open based on whether it has the resources to comply with the guidelines for the Center of Disease Control Prevention, state mandates, local health orders. And I'm actually going to paste into the chat the bullet points that they say, if you're going to reopen your pool, these are the things that you really should focus on following. And I'll include this article as well. It was written by an HOA attorney, I believe. So, we're still learning, as we said, but it's unfortunately, I wish we could say, yep, you got the green light, go ahead, go on, go forward. But we have to look at it really carefully as a case-by-case basis.
Hans has a non-COVID question. Yay, thanks, Hans. For defensible fire space, working with the county, was that the fire marshal or some other department or resource? I I think the fire department, your local fire department, can tell you more information about the defensible space for your specific community. What I saw on the news last night, and that was a KTVU Channel 2 news here, and it was a Napa community, and the membership was working with the folks in the county, like volunteering with the county to make sure that the defensible space around their community was expanded. And it was a single family home community. And I'm like 99% sure a similar thing happened in the Santa Cruz Mountains a year or so ago, but it was the membership communicating with the county and volunteering their time to work on that project. Oh.
I have a question actually for the attorneys on that COVID question. Are you guys seeing any lawsuits filed from owners catching COVID in the HOA common area?
I'd be happy to chime in on that. We're not seeing that, and I agree with your advice. The better lawsuit is someone suing us for not opening, as opposed to someone suing us for opening and they get ill with the virus. It's picking your poison, so to speak, right? One is insured risk, one is an uninsured risk. Last I checked, most of us don't drive our cars without automotive insurance. So it kind of seems like a dangerous choice to say, oh, we're going to open this up and we have no idea what's going to happen in this circumstance. So.
And, I'll add on to what Darren said, that, we haven't seen those lawsuits yet, but it doesn't mean that they're not coming. The statute of limitations is going to be on the shorter end, probably 2 years. At the longer end, maybe 4, depending on how someone brings a claim. So typically with these types of things, you don't see them right away. I mean, workplace claims usually happen pretty quickly after an incident, but claims of negligence, someone may sit on it for a while or be talking to an attorney. So it's not an indicator yet, but let's keep our fingers crossed that it stays that way. Maybe we don't get this rush of claims we were concerned about.
Yeah, we also saw recently the 3rd District Court of Appeals was hearing a case that was filed by some folks objecting to the governor's emergency orders. And based on the oral argument, those did not go well for the plaintiffs, meaning the courts were saying, the analogy would be, so in essence, we're being sued because we drove the speed limit and we complied with the requirements of the state and the county. I think a district court of appeal is going to look at that as sort of an absurd lawsuit. And I think that, again, we're in a much safer position being sued for complying with state and county orders as opposed to opening things up, which, and I've had this discussion with other attorneys that, the costs of defending that lawsuit would be extraordinary for the association, having to hire experts on public health, medical conditions, et cetera, to testify that the association complied or didn't do anything wrong and couldn't be found negligent. Could almost bankrupt an association even if you won the case, because typically there would be no attorney's fees clause at issue, and it would be a matter of the association paying its own costs to defend and or whatever other outcome there might be. So ultimately, safe harbor is typically comply with the state orders, comply with the county orders, as opposed to ignoring those and seeing what happens.
Always nice when an attorney agrees with you, because we only play attorneys on TV. So thank you, Darren.
Well, how could I not agree with you?
And I do think Ken may have his hand raised. Ken, did you have a question?
I did. Unfortunately, it's back on COVID. And regarding board liability, you mentioned under earthquake that the board still has responsibility or be open to liability issues on perhaps not purchasing earthquake insurance. So please comment on that. And secondarily, under the COVID reopening question, if a board does decide to go that way, and I do understand that the board assumes the liability for defending the HOA, are individual board members who make that decision or vote, are they personally liable, or does DNO cover that? And the subset of that question is, if we decide not to reopen and get a lawsuit, does DNO cover individual board members or the board?
So directors and officers liability, that's why you purchase it, to protect you as board members from being sued individually. Not all, I'm going to go on a little bit of a soapbox here, because not all directors and officers policies are created equal. So, and I know the ladies on the panel agree with me 100%. We do suggest that you purchase a standalone D&O policy with very strong policy language. So there's no question as to, you know, the defense that you will get. If you're accused of XYZ, that you have those coverage there, that coverage there. What we do see in our industry is some agents will just slap an endorsement D&O policy onto the liability policy. If you read that endorsement, you're lucky if it's maybe a paragraph. Am I right, ladies? Whereas when you have a standalone directors and officers liability policy, you're talking about 30, 40 pages of policy language that really spells out the type of coverage that you as board members have for the decisions that you make for the association. So hopefully that gives you some peace of mind, as I'm assuming you're a board member. And then going back to the earthquake portion, were you asking where the liability falls on earthquake, or where I predict there might be some liability in regards to earthquake coverage?
Yes, liability, or is there liability for not purchasing?
Yeah, so here's my fear. I fear that if we experience a major earthquake and there is substantial property loss, which a major earthquake that would be likely, and your membership looks to you and says, I need to rebuild, I need to repair, and you as a board chose not to purchase earthquake coverage. I want, and I know the ladies on the panel spoke to this too, I want for you as a board to go back in your meeting minutes and say, no, we got bids. We knew how much this was going to cost us. We even broke it down, or our agent broke it down, what it would cost per unit owner to have coverage for the entire association. We looked at stop loss limits where we have, you know, lower limits of coverage. We looked at insuring the entire thing, and we put it out to vote, and we didn't get the membership vote. So we did everything we possibly could to provide that earthquake coverage for you. And as a membership, it was chosen not to purchase the coverage. Now, that would be, in my book, you know, a perfect response if you chose not to purchase the coverage. My fear is when boards don't have the discussion, completely ignore the fact that we live in California, that we know that an earthquake could affect our property, especially if you're living near or close, you know, to a fault line. My fear is that if the board never has that discussion, the membership can come back and say, come on, you knew that we lived in earthquake country. You never had this discussion. You never provided us information, and we're going to, you know, we need to recover. That is where I feel like there could be some liability. And ladies, feel free, sorry.
I was going to say, you knocked that out of the house, because I mean, there's a lot of different angles there, but I think the biggest takeaway from that is to make sure that you are having that as a community-wide discussion. Not purchasing a sufficient amount of coverage is not an included item on most insurance policies. So if you have a community that's upset that you didn't purchase something, but you gave them the opportunity to have input into it, then they really don't have a case there. So.
And I would also add back to the D&O thing for a second. If you are a homeowner leader, if you serve on your board of directors, that directors and officers policy is for you. So it would behoove you to take a look at it. And not all endorsements are created equal, as Charlotte said. And there's some new stuff out there that Tina and I are now learning about with farmers,
right.
Which is our main carriers. We're farmers agents, and they've created something new, but it would take a look at it and see what is covered and what isn't covered. And if you're not happy with it, or if you have questions, ask those questions, because that coverage is specifically for you. And I don't know how many of you know this, but it also should cover past, present board members and their spouses. So it's important to take a look at it. And if you don't look at any other part of your insurance policy, look at the part that covers you.
And would you guys recommend meeting with your broker periodically to discuss that type of coverage and talking about the policies and what level of coverage there is in the D&O policy? And would you also, and as a follow-up to that, would you also recommend that they avoid shopping price on their D&O policy and shop
my
for the
goodness.
highest level of coverage that they can afford?
Absolutely.
I would also point out that meeting with your insurance agent is free. We don't charge. I'm not throwing any attorneys under the bus here, but I'm just saying, we'll talk all day long for free.
Yeah.
Yes,
In
please.
addition, you know, I always feel like the landscapers get all the time at the board meeting. It's like, get out of the way, you know. We want to talk to you. We want to have an open discussion, and the more frequently we can do that, the better understanding you'll have of your policy, mainly because we speak insurance, right? So we understand what we're talking about, but it might take a couple of sessions for you to get the full picture. And we can break down each section rather than cramming it all in one meeting once a year and hope you got it, you know. So it really is important, and we enjoy it and would love to be, you know, a regular on your board meeting call. So, you know, give us a call.
And I would add, you know, one of the largest line items for any board is insurance, and we know that. And so, you know, one of the presentations I love to give, for those of you that have sat through another one of my boring insurance presentations, is building value in your insurance policies. And so, you know, I don't want you to only find value when a loss occurs and you know, okay, well, I had the terrible loss and I got my, you know, unit built back. That's the only time that you find value. No way. We want you to find the value in the price that you pay immediately and, you know, all throughout the life of that policy. So that means inviting us to board meetings, giving us 10 minutes. I swear we can do this in 10 minutes, giving us 10 minutes to go through your insurance policies and make some recommendations. You know, we worked hard to get our CIRMS designations. Let us prove to you why we are experts. Let us come to your meetings and educate your entire membership.
That sounded like a hype video, Charlotte. We need to re-record.
We are recording, so we can make that into another hype video.
Rachel, you have your assignment.
Do we have any other questions from the crowd?
We did get a private comment sent to me that this was a very good educational session for homeowner members.
I'm very, very happy to hear that. There's more where this came from. Maybe another CAI luncheon.
More
I don't
insurance!
push my luck right now.
Don't worry, it's already on the books.
Yay.
Darren's like, and done.